Hey guys, welcome back to Cracked Housing Fab. On this video, we're going to do some awesome upgrades and give this a stage 2 performance kit.
We're back in the garage. We're going to be doing the stage 2 performance kit like Kurt talked about from Go Power Sports. We're super excited that Go Power Sports hooked us up with the stage 2 kit. We're going to be walking you guys through it. And you may remember the drift trikes that we built. That's what we put the engines on.
Did you tell them the best part?
What's
We're
that?
doing the upgrades to mine.
That's right. Kurt's getting the upgrades. But the cool thing is we're going to be able to show you guys, since we have one that's stock, mine, and one that's going to be modified, Kurt's, so we're going to be able to see what the difference is. Okay, so kind of want to go over what you get in the kit when you get the stage 2 performance kit from Go Power Sports. You get a 22mm Mikuni carb, flat slide carb, the adapter to go from the engine to the carburetor, the cone filter that is associated with that, because obviously you're going to remove your existing filter, new rod bearings for the lightened connecting rod, a cam with higher lift and duration, lightened billet flywheel, some miscellaneous hardware, new valve springs, because you're going to need those obviously with the different cam, and an exhaust header. So let's get started.
All right, before we get started, we have to take off the stock air cleaner. It'll be kind of cool to get this thing going.
Yep, remove that. Remove your stock muffler. That thing's no good.
Oh, the dirt in here. Maybe that's from taking our drift trikes off-road.
Oh, maybe that huge puddle you drove through.
Oh, yeah. Whoa. You guys have to check out that video if you didn't see that. All right, so we're working on getting all the exhaust off, pulling the carburetor off. On here, you want to take even all this stuff off. Just get it right down to the bare block, and that's what we're working on. So, all right, after you get the carb and everything off, I have to run as eye socket, but you're going to take all the linkage off, because with the new carburetor, we don't need any of this junk. So I'm going to take all that off.
All right, so Kurt got everything tore down to, we got the carburetor off, we've taken the coil off, the governor off. A lot of the stuff on the outside of the block is off now. So the next step is to take the flywheel off. Flywheel comes off, obviously these plastic fins will come off. This you'll have to save because this goes to the pull start, so we're gonna need this afterwards. So, but it's a 21mm socket.
Look at that.
Pretty easy.
So you say.
Yep, so this you won't need. It's obviously the new billet flywheel. Has the fins on it already.
Look at that.
All right, guys, so when you're taking the flywheel off, just run the nut back on a few threads to protect the end of the crankshaft, and then put a pry bar back here between the case and the flywheel and just give it one good hit, and the flywheel comes right off.
Ta-da!
All right, next step, pull the valve cover bolts out, take the valve cover off. All right, next step, we're taking the side of the engine off.
All right, so I'm gonna pull this cam out, but before you do, make sure the timing marks are lined up on there. There's 2 little dots. I wanna make sure they're lined up for some reason.
There we go, and then the push rods will come out.
They'll just come right out. Not too bad. Oop. Ooh. Oop.
This one came out the top.
Oh. After the cam's out, you just rotate the crank so we can get to the bolts for the rod.
Yep, there's 2 bolts on the rod right there.
Just use a wrench to get in there and loosen them up. All right, in order to pull the crank out, you rotate it to where the piston's all the way up at the top, which I did already there. And if you get it just right so it clears, the baby will come right on out.
There we go. There's a crankshaft.
All right, time to get rid of the governor. That pesky thing slows us down.
That's right.
So there's a few parts to here. There's some washers that you don't want to lose in the motor.
Yeah, make sure, be very careful of this, because if you miss something, bad news.
Yeah, in here, a bunch of little parts. No one really knows what they do.
They slow you down.
They slow you down.
They add extra weight.
But,
And they stop the engine from going fast and being fun.
so I believe there's 2 washers there.
Yep.
So I think we can just tap that out now.
Yeah. So that's the shaft, the other side of the governor.
Yep.
We're gonna tap that out with a punch and a hammer.
Ho ho ho. Got rid of that.
And there's
One
one
more
washer
washer.
on there. So you got to be careful, guys. You do not want to miss this stuff.
Yeah, so I believe there's 3 washers. A couple of these little guys. So that's what you want to see.
Yeah, you definitely don't want that bouncing around in the engine.
All right, so after you get the governor out, it leaves you with 2 holes in the block, which you can't have that, or you will lose oil. There's that one here that we knocked out, and then there's one on the side. And there's 2 different ways to do it. You can get a self-tapping 1/4-inch bolt and run it in there with some like Loctite. We're just gonna run a tap in it really quick. Tap it, run the bolt in, and seal it up. But I'm gonna do it on the side so we don't get filings into the motor. And then we can just blow the filings back out. All right, so we have the 1/4-20 bolts in, nice and tight with some Loctite so they don't ever loosen up. Now we get to pull this down, the rod to change this, get to the wrist pin and the...
Yep, so obviously we're not pulling the piston all the way out, so we don't have to bother with the rings.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to pull it all the way out.
And then there's a little itty bitty circlip in there that we have to pop out.
All right, so we got the little pin out, or the wrist thing. Oops. Go a little more. Oops, we don't want to go too far. Stick something in there, slide that out.
Now Kurt's pulling the wrist pin out, so then the rod should come out of there.
Look at that.
Oh,
Now we're just going to push this back in there a little bit. Just so we don't lose anything.
perfect.
So at this point I pulled out both the drain plugs because you do get sediment that'll go in there. So I'm just going to blow them out. Ugh. And then just kind of wipe out the inside of the engine with the clean rag. Any debris you might have got in there taking it apart. But we definitely want it clean now. All right, so we have the rod that we're going to put in.
Yep, that's a billet high performance rod.
Look at that.
That thing is, the freaking machining on that thing is so cool.
I know, compared to the stock one.
Yeah, it's like a cast.
It's like night and day.
Yeah.
Well, we got to break these guys loose. That's a 6 point or 12 point.
12 point, yeah.
12 point,
inch.
1/4 inch.
And just be careful, the washers on there are a specific way, so be mindful of which way they come off. And then, so while Kurt's taking those out, you need to make sure, especially if this is a used engine, these ones are still fairly new. We've only had maybe a couple of hours of runtime. So you have to measure this, where the rod goes around to make sure. And you have to be at 1 inch, 180 thousandths, plus or minus 5 thousandths. Now I measured ours, it's right in that tolerance, so it's in good shape. We didn't expect to see any surprises, but make sure and check that on yours.
All right, so we have to put the rod bearings in, which the factory one did not have rod bearings. But we have our brake-in oil. You just want to lube everything up really good. Keep them clean. Now these do have a little notch in them, and so does the bearing. So line those up.
And they do push into the rod, so you have to kind of press them into there almost.
Yeah. So when that's nice and tight in that corner.
And then repeat for the cap.
All right, to put the rod on, you got the bearings in, line that up. We want the tapered part of the shaft facing you, and then the curve of the rod going up. You don't want to put it backwards, and the oil sling grabber is down. So we oiled up our bolts so we can torque them properly.
Yep, and then these will be torqued to 90 inch-pounds to start with. Okay, so Kurt has these to 90, now he's doing 130, and then we're going to bump up to 170. And then make sure you do the same bolt first every time when you're doing it, just to make sure that you're torquing everything down at a nice even way. Okay, so Kurt has the bolts torqued. Turned out really nice. And then check your wrist pin. Needs to be 716 on the Tillotson engines. 716,000. So I checked that. It is right on the money. That rod is made specifically for that, so we're good to go. Okay, so the process that you would have just seen was to seat the bearings into the rod cap and the rod itself. So now we have to back them off, take the rod back off, and then we're gonna begin putting the rod on the piston.
All right, so we want to make sure the direction's still straight. You want the little scooper down at the bottom. So we'll do that.
Put oil on the wrist pin.
Use that.
Could be a surgeon.
I could be. That is true.
And then obviously make sure, like you said, don't pull the piston out too far. Then you have a problem with the rings.
There we go.
Boom, just like that.
Boom, boom, boom.
And then a little circlip. Just snaps in. There's a groove on the piston on the inside bore there that circlip snaps into. Make sure that thing is snapped all the way in, and then it has a positive snap in. You do not want that piece coming out.
All right, so we push the piston back up so we have some room to do this part.
This is kind of the tedious part. The tapered part of the shaft goes into the case of the engine at this point. And then just going to take a little bit of wiggling and moving around to get that to fall into place and to line up everything with the rod.
All right, so before we retorque the rod bolts, at this point you don't want to lay the motor back down, because if you have this shaft pushed in crooked and you tighten that, it could cause that bearing to bind. So you want to make sure it's free, it moves freely, it's seated in there before you torque it, and you just follow the same torquing as we did previously.
Okay guys, so the next step we're going to be doing is installing the push rods and the lifters, the cam. The cool thing about Go Power Sports, we have the Hot 265 cam from Go Power Sports. So they do give you the card that has all the cam specs on it, which is kind of cool. So that's right there if you are interested. So, yep, Kurt's you just put the push rods in. Those are pretty straightforward. They just slide up into the machined opening for them in the bore. And the lifter pushes on the end of it. I know it's kind of tough to see.
Yeah, just put it back the way it was. Just putting some more oil on it as we go.
Yep, and then obviously we're using the motor oil that we're going to run in the engine. You can use assembly lube, but it doesn't hurt to use the...
And this motor already has an hour or two on it, so everything's somewhat broke in.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think we're fine.
All right.
And then
and there's the new cam.
And guys, we'll put the link to this whole kit down in the description below.
Yeah.
For the upgrade for the Tillotson.
It's a pretty awesome setup. Makes it a lot more fun. So if you built something, a go-kart or whatever for, you know, a son or daughter, and you want to make it go a little bit faster, or you built something that you want to make go faster, this is the ticket right here. And make sure right before you put the cam in, hit that subscribe button.
And also, before you put the cam in, line up the cam marks.
Yep, that helps.
You definitely want the timing right.
Yep, there's a ground or a drilled spot there and there that will line up your timing. And we line the crankshaft up with the journal that the cam goes into roughly before we put that in there. Okay, so Kurt cleaned up the side cover, got that nice and clean, and we make sure and just oil everything really good again before you put the side cover on, just to make sure everything's good to go.
Make sure your dowel pins are lined up.
Yep, dowel pins. Sometimes they'll stay in the engine, sometimes they'll fall out, sometimes they'll stay in the cover. Just be mindful of those. And then slide the side cover back on and put the bolts in, and then it's 17 foot-pounds. And obviously don't tighten them in a line crisscross, so that way everything tightens down nice and even.
All right, so to change the valve springs, we have to pull the rocker arms off. I loosened the nuts on these. We're going to readjust the gaps anyway. We're going to take the center bolt out.
So there's a 8 mil bolt there in the center. It's pretty tight. There we go. And that's going to allow, or take, this will take this center bracket out of here. I know it's tough to see on the camera, but right here, and then this will allow us to pull the pivot studs out of the rocker arms. Okay guys, so we're going to change the valve springs. We have some stronger valve springs because this thing's going to run at a lot higher RPM. So we need to push down the valve retainer and pull out the little, I don't know what those are called, I'll be honest. But they keep the valve.
Okay, so we go like that.
There's one, the magnet.
Usually you just pull one and then you can go off to the side.
There's little tiny, little itty bitty pieces.
So don't lose those. And then the springs, actually one side's bigger than the other. So where's the new spring at? Right here.
Right there, yep. Yeah, so what Kurt's talking about is the inside boron right here and on the seal. The spring can only go one way, so be mindful of that. You can't, it'd be difficult to put them in the wrong way, but it wouldn't be correct if you did. All right, this is the challenging part. Now we have to, once we take the spring off, or put the new spring on, obviously, now we have to compress the spring again and put these two little, and they're tapered a certain way, so you need to be careful. The tapered, smaller end of the taper goes into the retainer.
And if you don't have the tool to do this,
yeah, we don't have a valve spring compressor.
So you got to have two people. You're not doing this yourself without the tool.
All right, let go.
There you have it.
Just like that. It's a little bit of a challenge, but yeah, you couldn't do that with one person. There's no way. So you have to hold the valve up, push the spring down, and then put the little retainer, little keepers in there. So that is how you change the valve spring. So now we're going to put we put this in here just so that way nothing ended up down here in the engine. So we're going to have to take it back apart again. Looks good. So now the push rods will go in. We'll put the rocker arms back on, and then we can set our valve lash. Okay, so we need to set the valve lash. It's 3 thou intake and exhaust. I don't have a 3 thou feeler gauge. I've got a 2 and a 4. So I'm gonna set it at, loose on the 2, and then obviously make sure the 4 won't go in there. Not the most scientific way, but I think that we'll be able to get close. And then to set the valve lash, you just break the jam nut loose, and then you can rotate this, make sure it's loose, and then just run it up till it's just snug, and it should be pretty close. Slide the feeler gauge in there. Yeah, see, it's actually too much right now. So I'll set it loose on the 2, and then the 4 won't go in there. So that's pretty close. And they will need to be checked again once you heat cycle the engine. Nice thing is it's easy to get to. It's only 4 bolts to get to the valves. So you heat cycle the engine a few times and then check it cold again. All right, guys, it's another day. That's why we're wearing different clothes. We had to leave off and do some other stuff. But anyways, so next step is we're going to put the billet flywheel on there.
Look at this thing.
That thing is freaking sweet.
Yeah, don't want to drop that.
Nope. So we have to use some lapping compound to lap this to the flywheel to the crankshaft. So we're gonna do that, but first you have to pull the woodruff key out.
Use a paper towel so we don't mark it up. Keep it all smooth, and we'll put the compound on here and we'll spin it on the shaft a little bit.
Yep.
And get that all lapped in.
All right, we have a little bit of compound on the shaft there. Kurt's gonna slide that on and spin it.
Make sure it doesn't spin off and hit the floor.
Yep. Just gonna rotate it several times and then. All right, and then once you're finished using the compound on there, you should see a little bit of a rough surface finish there on there, and as well on the inside of the flywheel.
All right, so before we torque the flywheel, which is 65 foot-pounds, when you put this cup on, you got to make sure that little dowel's lined up. You definitely don't want to smush that all in. Now, one important thing is you just don't want to grab a pair of pliers and hold the crank and scar it all up. Some people make a little disc that they can bolt. We're just going to use an old clutch throw it on here out here, and then grab a pair of pliers and hold the clutch itself so we can torque this. It works, it just keeps you from marking up the crank. All right, got the flywheel torqued on, looks good. Feels like there's a lot more resistance now when we spin that over. But we're gonna get the coil on. So you wanna make this space, the gap, around 55 thousandths. So just go through all your junk mail and find a combination. Business cards work, but you wanna get it right to...
right to 55 thousandths.
Yeah, that's what I meant to say.
You knew what you meant.
Because I can put the bolts in.
We put a little bit of Loctite on the bolts just to be certain that the vibration doesn't loosen them up over time. And then snug them up, and then you can set your gap. I know it looks a little silly with all our papers in there, but it works.
Well, obviously it's going to be tighter at the crease of the paper, so I'm doing it where it's kind of...
Yeah, back in a little bit.
I think that's pretty good. I'm going to snug these up.
In worst, I mean, if it's off a little bit, then the motor might run a little bit funky. You have to readjust it, but this should be pretty darn close.
Righty-tighty becomes righty-loosey.
That's a bad day.
That is.
Every 10-minute job's one snapped off bolt away from being a 2-day ordeal.
All right, so it's time to mount our 22 millimeter Mikuni carb. And you get this cool little adapter spacer.
Yep, but that's made by Go Power Sports too. That's cool. They made their own adapter.
And then, so there's some slots on here. So if your motor, so you can kind of position the carb angle. Because if your motor is mounted, you know, at an angle, either way, you're going to want the carb straight.
Yeah, the float bowl has to be level with the ground, yeah.
And then while you look in here, there's an O-ring here that just seals on this plate. So when you're in there, before you tighten it up, you might not see it on the camera, but you want to make sure the O-ring is consistent gapping all the way around.
Yep.
So we'll get that bolted up.
Yep, and they give you the hardware with the kit, so you're going to get an Allen, or a, Allen bolt with a nut, 5 millimeter, I think it is. Yeah, 5 millimeter Allen wrench, 10 millimeter wrench. Put it on there, tighten it up. Okay, so Kurt has the adapter bolted to the carburetor. Now, obviously, you need to go from the adapter to the cylinder head. There is a gasket there they will give you, and then it's just Allen bolts to run those in as well. So run those in nice and tight. Okay, now we have the carburetor installed, everything's tightened up. Time for the spark plug. So it's actually pretty cool. It's an Autolite Racing spark plug. So go ahead and throw the no gap to set on that one if you pick up that one, which is AR 391 OX or 3910X.
All right, now it's time to get the side cover back on. Kind of cover up the awesome looking flywheel, but so now it's just reassembling some of the stuff we took off. So we'll get this cover put on.
Yep, there's 4 bolts on there. If you
Make sure nothing binds with the
starter. Yeah. All right, so once you get the side cover on, then you have to hook up the kill switch. Pretty simple. Feed the wire through. There's the one connector, and then the ground. Pretty easy.
All right, time to get the fuel tank on.
Yep, 3 bolts, 1 in the front. Well, 1 bolt, 2 nuts with washers on the back, and then the little vent goes down underneath. There's 2 spots to hook underneath on the heat shield.
All right, before we put the exhaust on, I just wanted to mention that when you go to hook up the fuel line, the original fuel line, if you use the stock tank, is a little too short. So either run a whole new fuel line, or you can put a fuel filter and then extend it a little bit more. All right, so we have this really cool exhaust header to put on here. Eliminate all that factory exhaust. Then on there, and there's a gasket in there. Make sure that's in place.
2 lock washers, 2 nuts. Pretty easy.
One of the last steps is putting the throttle cable on. So unscrew this thingy.
Yep, so there's a cap on the top and then a big spring. Just be careful. It pops up at you when you...
Pull that out. Now there is a groove here that lines up with the little pin on the inside.
There's a pin down in the carburetor. Kind of see it down in there. And hooking up the cable is actually pretty straightforward. Feed the cable through the cap.
The spring on.
And then
there's a little cable spot.
Yep, and then it goes up that groove. Boom.
Like that.
And then just make sure you line that pin up with the groove on the slide.
Yeah, it should fall right into place.
Yep. And then screw everything back together. And then once you do that, once it's all together, make sure and pull on the end of the cable. Just to make sure it opens and closes. It's not stuck wide open. You see in there, All right, final part of doing the upgrade. You have to put the Go Power Sports cone air filter on there. So get this guy put on there. This is easy, obviously. This is the easiest part. That's why Kurt let me do it. And then just regular clamp, slide it onto the carburetor, and tighten it up.
Oh, that looks so cool.
And then that blue stuff on there is just the protective thing for the chrome on there. All right,
Oh, look at
ready
that.
to rock. Now we have to just put the engine back on the drift trike. Boom.
Looks good.
Okay, so Kurt he just got the engine mounted. We're starting to run the throttle cable. That's what he's working on currently. And one thing is, make sure you put engine oil in here. You don't want to forget, be excited to hear it run, and then forget to put the engine oil in there. That would not be a good thing. So that's the last thing we really have to do, then we can hear it run.
All right, guys, it's the moment of truth. Let's fire this thing up. Oh.
That thing sounds great.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it sounds good. Dude, that thing sounds so much better now.
Wow, it doesn't even sound like the same motor.
No.
Holy crap.
No,
That
you
is-
can hear like the thump when it idles.
Yeah, you just hit that throttle, it's like instant, and you just feel the torque of it. My favorite word.
That's right.
Wow.
All right, most important part of doing all this is to make sure and test drive it. So I think Kurt's gonna do a little bit of test driving here for us.
Yes, sir. All right, this thing is amazing. Just sitting here feeling the idle, you kind of like thumps and you can feel all that torque. It's just, it surprises me how much power this thing has.
In the throttle response, I took it for a little ride too, and it's just like instant throttle response.
Yeah, it's instant. There's no lag. It's just, you give it gas and it's there.
Yeah, and I mean when you're idling, like the cam, you can hear the cam thump.
Yeah, it shakes your eyeballs loose sitting there.
Yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile upgrade if you have one of these Tillotson 212s. Makes a world of difference. It's awesome. And a huge shout out and thank you to Go Power Sports for hooking us up with the kit. We'll put all the links to all the products in the description down below, so make sure you go and check those out. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe. And if this is your first video you're seeing from us, we're building a cross car, so check that out. But anyways, thanks for watching Crack Talking Fab, and we'll see you in the next one.